The splash was louder than I expected, but not louder than Karen's shriek when she realized the Harley bobbing in the lake wasn't just some ugly eyesore, but my pride and joy. I stood there, dripping lake water from my boots, staring at the handlebars jutting out like a drowning animal, while Karen, our HOA president and self-appointed goddess of the cul-de-sac, clutched her pearls and shouted, "Well, maybe now you'll learn to keep junk off community property." The absurdity of it hit me all at once. This woman had just shoved a motorcycle worth more than her Lexus into the lake, and she was smiling like she'd solved world hunger. What she didn't know, and what made my grin spread wider than hers, was that the county sheriff was standing right behind me, fishing pole in hand, watching the whole thing. I should probably back up. See, I bought the Lakeside Ranch last spring, just outside the HOA subdivision. The property lines are clear as day. My driveway runs parallel to their manicured streets, but it's mine. Still, the HOA crowd treats me like a squatter at the edge of their kingdom. They wave papers, bark about community standards, and glare at me like I'm tracking mud across their white carpets. But I didn't care. I had a house I loved, a patch of land big enough for my Harley, and a view of the lake. That's all I wanted. Then came Karen. Every neighborhood's got one. Hers just happened to be on steroids. She believed the HOA's jurisdiction extended into my property, simply because her deck had a line of sight to it. She called it visual encroachment. Her first demand letter read like a manifesto. Remove the Harley, paint the shed taupe, mow the uncivilized prairie grass down to 3 inches, and respect the tranquility of the neighborhood by keeping non-conforming equipment out of sight. I pinned it to the fridge. Thought it was funny. But Karen doesn't like being laughed at. She started small. Nasty notes on my door. HOA fines slipped into my mailbox, illegal, by the way, and complaints about my noise pollution whenever I rev the Harley. Then she got bold. One evening, I came home to find her standing in my driveway with a tape measure, muttering about community setback guidelines. That's when I realized this wasn't going to be one of those neighborly squabbles you shrug off. This was war. Still, I never imagined she'd lay hands on the Harley. That bike isn't just metal, it's memory. My old man rebuilt it with me, bolt by bolt, after he got back from deployment. Every scratch tells a story. When Karen marched down the gravel path that morning, eyes locked on it like a hawk, I figured she'd pose for a few pictures, maybe threaten another bogus fine. But nope, she planted her Gucci flats against the kickstand, gave one hard shove, and over it went. Down the slope, into the lake. The sheriff, bless his soul, had been casting for base about 10 yards away. He saw the whole thing, Karen's push, the Harley sliding, my stunned face. He's an old family friend, though Karen didn't know that. To her, he was just some hick with a fishing pole. "Did you just vandalize my property?" I asked, still calm, still dripping disbelief more than anger. Karen lifted her chin. "It's community property, and you were warned. That motorcycle violates HOA guidelines. Consider this enforcement." I could have laughed right there. "Community property?" I said. "Lady, you're standing on my land." She snapped back. "Your land is our view. That makes it our concern." That's when the sheriff set his pole against a rock and strolled over. He had that measured stride, slow enough to spook deer, steady enough to chill anyone watching. Karen barely glanced at him. She was too busy brushing imaginary dust off her blazer like she'd just finished a civic duty. "Afternoon, Karen," the sheriff said, voice low and even. "You want to explain why you just pushed his bike into the lake?" She blinked at him, irritated. "Excuse me? Who even are you?" He pulled his badge from his back pocket and let the sun glint off it. "I'm the sheriff, and I just watched you commit criminal mischief." Her jaw slackened, then stiffened like a rubber band snapping back. "That's ridiculous. I'm the HOA president. I was enforcing bylaws. He's the violator." "Ma'am," the sheriff said, "bylaws don't trump state law. You damaged his property. That's a felony, given the value of that motorcycle." Karen's face flushed beet red. She jabbed a finger at me. "You put that junk in plain sight. You antagonized this community. We're sick of it. I leaned against the fence post, still calm. Karen, I parked my Harley in my own driveway. That's the whole crime. You decided to shove into the lake because you didn't like looking at it. The sheriff turned to me. You want to press charges? Now, here's where I'll admit, I hesitated. Not because I didn't want justice, but because I knew Karen. If I pressed charges right then, she'd double down, drag lawyers into it, spin herself as a victim. She lived on drama. But if I let her squirm under the sheriff's spotlight for a bit, maybe I could find a cleaner way to end this. So I shrugged. Not yet. Let's just get the bike out first. The sheriff raised an eyebrow, but didn't argue. He walked Karen back up toward the street while I waded in, water climbing to my waist to tug the Harley upright. Took me the better part of an hour to drag it out, coughing lakeweed, dripping mud, but it started because of course it did. Old man built it tougher than any HOA president. When I rode it back up the slope, engine growling, Karen was standing stiff as a statue beside the sheriff. Her lips were pressed tight, but her eyes, those eyes were calculating. She wasn't beaten. She was plotting. I killed the engine, swung my leg off, and faced her. Karen, you crossed a line today, and you did it in front of the sheriff. Whatever game you're playing, you just lost. Her voice came out cold, clipped. We'll see. That was the moment I knew this was only the opening salvo. Karen wasn't done with me. Not by a long shot. She'd lost the battle, but the war? The war was just beginning. And judging by the way she glanced back at her house, chin high, I had the sinking feeling she already had her next move lined up. What I didn't know was just how far she was willing to go, or how many neighbors she'd rope into the fight. Because pushing my Harley into the lake was nothing compared to what she had planned next. The next morning, I found out exactly how fast rumors travel when they start in the HOA grapevine. My phone buzzed before sunrise with a text from my buddy Jake, who lives 2 blocks over. Man, did Karen really push your Harley into the lake? Half the neighborhood's talking about it. By the time I finished my coffee, 3 more texts rolled in for neighbors I barely knew, each one dripping with some mix of curiosity, disbelief, and quiet admiration. The story had spread faster than wildfire, and I hadn't told a soul. That meant one thing. Karen was already spinning her version. Sure enough, when I drove into town later, I spotted her Lexus parked outside the little bakery near the courthouse. Inside, she was holding court like some queen bee, hands flying as she told a table over Tyrese how she rescued the neighborhood from a dangerous nuisance. She didn't see me walk by the window, but I caught enough of her words to know she was doubling down. In her version, I'd parked an illegal vehicle too close to community lake access, and she'd bravely acted on behalf of the HOA to remove it. She even called me a reckless biker who endangered kids. Now, here's the thing. I don't lose my cool over gossip, but I do have a long fuse connected to a big stick of dynamite, and Karen was busy lighting matches. I decided right then I wasn't going to play defense anymore. If she wanted a war perception, fine, I'd give her one. But I'd make sure her empire of control crumbled from the inside out. The first crack showed up that evening. A knock on my door, 2 of my neighbors, a middle-aged couple named Sam and Linda. They looked uneasy, like kids sneaking into the principal's office. Sam cleared his throat and said, "Listen, we don't agree with what Karen did. That bike's your property, and it's none of the HOA's business. We just wanted you to know, not everyone's with her." That was the moment I realized Karen had overplayed her hand. People will tolerate bossy newsletters, endless fines, and passive-aggressive landscaping tips. But when their leader starts shoving personal property into a lake, suddenly they see the monster behind the mask. I thanked Sam and Linda, invited them in for a beer, and by the time they left, I knew I had allies. Not just silent ones. Either they were tired of Karen's tyranny, and they wanted her gone. But Karen, true to form, wasn't retreating. The very next day, I came home from a supply run to find bright orange "Notice of Violation" signs staked into my yard. Not 1, not 2, 12. Each one printed with some nonsense about non-compliance, hazardous equipment, and failure to conform with neighborhood standards. She'd plastered them like campaign posters, front and center, where every passing car could see. I stood there staring at the signs, shaking my head, when I heard tires crunching behind me. It was the sheriff again. He rolled down his window, grinning. "Guess you got a fan club." "More like a stalker," I said. He climbed out, pulled one of the signs, and flipped it over. "These aren't worth the paper they're printed on. You're outside HOA jurisdiction. She knows that, but she's counting on embarrassment to wear you down." I chuckled. She doesn't know me very well then. The sheriff leaned on his truck. "You thinking about pressing charges yet?" "Not yet," I said. "I've got another idea." That idea took shape later that week. With Sam and Linda's help, I invited a handful of neighbors over for a quiet little meeting in my garage. People showed up nervous, peeking over their shoulders like they were breaking curfew. But once we got talking, the stories poured out. Karen finding one guy for leaving his trash invisible for 12 minutes, another for painting his shutters too creamy a white. Someone else mentioned she tried to dictate what kind of flowers could be planted by mailboxes. And every single person admitted they were tired of it, but no one wanted to be the first to challenge her. That's when I realized my Harley in the lake wasn't just my battle. It was the spark everyone had been waiting for. So I laid it out. Look, she messed with me because she thought I'd roll over. But she made a mistake. She did it in front of the sheriff. That means I've got leverage. If we're smart, we can use this moment to cut her down to size. Not just for me, for everyone. The room was quiet, then Linda spoke up. "What are you proposing?" I grinned. "Let's flip the script. She wants to humiliate me in front of the neighborhood? Fine. We'll show the neighborhood what she really is." The plan was simple: visibility. Karen thrived in the shadows of bureaucracy, forms, bylaws, secret meetings. She relied on people being too intimidated or apathetic to resist. But sunlight? Sunlight burns. The next morning, I hauled the Harley into my driveway, polished to a shine despite its dunk in the lake. I parked it front and center, draped an American flag over the seat, and taped one of Karen's bright orange "Notice of Violation" signs to the front wheel. On a big piece of plywood, I spray painted the words, "Not HOA property. Ask the sheriff." Then I sat back on the porch with a glass of iced tea and waited. It didn't take long. Neighbors walked by, slowing down to stare, whispering to each other. Some even chuckled and gave me a thumbs up. By noon, I counted 5 cars that drove by twice just to look. By evening, I heard the unmistakable sound of Karen's heels marching up the driveway. She stopped in front of the Harley, hands on her hips, eyes blazing. "You think this is funny?" "Not particularly," I said, "but it is honest advertising. You're making a spectacle of yourself." "Correction," I said, sipping my tea. "I'm making a spectacle of your lies." Her face twitched, but she tried to hold her composure. "Remove that immediately, or I'll fine you again." I set down the glass. "Go ahead." The sheriff said he'll be happy to add harassment to the list. That got her. She blinked, faltered, and for the first time since I'd met her, looked genuinely unsure. But only for a second. Then she straightened up, smoothed her blazer, and said, "You're making a very powerful enemy." I couldn't help but laugh. "Karen, you made yourself an enemy the second you shoved my Harley into the lake. I'm just returning the favor." She turned on her heel and stormed off, but I knew it wasn't over. Karen didn't back down. She escalated. I was proven right the following weekend. I woke up to find my driveway blocked by a pair of orange traffic cones and a giant banner strung between them. "Illegal trespasser on HOA land." She'd gone full public spectacle, staging my supposed removal like a medieval trial by humiliation. She thought pushing my Harley into the lake was her boldest move. She hadn't seen bold yet. I thought Karen had finally peaked with the traffic cones and the banner, but I underestimated her talent for finding new lows. The morning after her little spectacle, I woke to the sound of hammering. Not the usual neighborly hammering of a kid building a treehouse, but the deliberate, metallic thud of someone trying to claim territory. When I stepped outside, there she was, standing with two HOA board members erecting a fence. On my land, they'd dragged in prefab panels, the kind you rent for concerts or construction zones, and were lining them right across my gravel driveway, blocking access. Karen's voice was sharp and triumphant as she directed the men. Right here, this is the property line. You can't use this driveway anymore. It's an unauthorized access route. I leaned against the porch rail and called out, "Morning, Karen. You lost your mind. Or just the map." She spun, lips curling. "This isn't your land. This is HOA right-of-way. We're reclaiming it." I laughed, not out of humor, but out of sheer disbelief. "Karen, I had the county surveyor mark this line when I bought the place. Those orange stakes," I pointed to one sticking up just past where they were hammering. "That's the property boundary. You're 5 feet inside it." She crossed her arms. "We have our own survey. Yours is wrong." The sheriff had told me once that when people start saying we have our own survey, it usually means they've got a doodle drawn on a cocktail napkin. Still, I didn't rush in swinging. I watched as they wrestled another fence panel upright, sweating under the summer sun, while Karen stood back like some general directing troops. When a sheriff's truck pulled up 15 minutes later, I could have kissed the hood. He stepped out slow, sunglasses on, taking in the scene. "Well, this looks official," he drawled. Karen whirled, instantly defensive. "Sheriff, thank goodness you're here. We're enforcing community easement rights." "He's been trespassing." The sheriff raised an eyebrow. "On his own driveway?" "Yes," she snapped. "This entire stretch is HOA property. We have documentation." She waved a folder dramatically, like she was unveiling the Constitution. The sheriff took it, thumbed through, and then whistled low. "Karen, this isn't a survey. This is a printout from Google Maps." Her face went scarlet. "It's visual proof. Visual proof that you don't know what a survey is," he said, handing it back. Then he turned to me. "Want to haul these panels out? Or you want the satisfaction?" I grinned. "I'll take it." We dismantled the panels piece by piece, dropping them in a heap at the end of the road. Karen sputtered threats, demanding the sheriff arrest me for interference with enforcement. He just tipped his hat and said, "Karen, one more stunt like this, and you'll be spending a night in county." For once, she didn't have a comeback. She grabbed her folder, stomped her Lexus, and peeled away. But here's the thing. The fence wasn't really the twist. The twist came later that night. I was sitting on the porch, watching the sun dip below the lake, when Sam and Linda stopped by again. They looked uneasy, like they were carrying a secret. Sam finally spoke. "You need to know, Karen's not acting alone anymore. She's rallied the board. They voted last night to officially designate your property as part of the HOA." I nearly spit my drink. Designate my property? They can't just vote to own land. Linda nodded. "We know, but they filed a claim with the county clerk this morning. It won't hold up legally, but they're hoping it ties you up in red tape." And there was the bigger twist. Karen wasn't just harassing me with signs and fences anymore. She was dragging the whole HOA board into it, weaponizing bureaucracy. If her scheme stuck even for a week, I could end up locked out of loans, insurance, or even the ability to sell the place. That's when I decided waiting wasn't enough. I couldn't just outlast her tantrums. I had to strike back. So the next day, I drove to the county courthouse. The clerk knew me by name at this point. She sighed when I walked in. "Let me guess. Karen again?" "Bullseye," I said, sliding the papers across. She scanned them, chuckled, and shook her head. "This won't hold water, but it'll gum up the system until we get an injunction." "How long?" "Couple weeks minimum." That's when the idea hit me. If Karen wanted to play in the realm of public records, I'd meet her there. But unlike her sloppy Google Maps stunt, I'd do it with precision. I requested certified copies of my survey, my deed, and the sheriff's incident report from the Harley in the Lake fiasco. Then I filed a counterclaim, an official complaint of HOA overreach and harassment. The clerk stamped it, slid it into the system, and just like that, Karen's claim wasn't just baseless, it was ammunition against her. But here's where it got delicious. Public records are exactly that, public, which meant anyone could walk into the courthouse and read them. And people did. Within days, whispers spread that Karen hadn't just embarrassed herself with the Harley. She'd potentially dragged the entire HOA into legal jeopardy. The following Saturday, I hosted another garage meeting. This time, double the number of neighbors showed up. Some brought lawn chairs. One guy even brought a cooler. They weren't just curious anymore. They were angry. Karen's obsession with me was now threatening their wallets, their property values, their insurance rates. I stood at the front, holding up the stamp complaint. This isn't just about my driveway anymore. This is about Karen thinking she can use HOA power to take what isn't hers. She picked the wrong fight. The crowd murmured agreement. Someone shouted, "Impeach her." Another yelled, "She's got to go." And that's when I realized the war wasn't just me versus Karen anymore. It was Karen versus everyone. Of course, she didn't take the growing rebellion quietly. The very next day, she escalated again. I came home to find a certified letter taped to my door. It was thick, pages stapled together, written in dense legalese. Karen had hired an attorney. Inside, the letter accused me of willful defamation, harassment of an HOA officer, and, my personal favorite, emotional distress caused by non-conforming property displays. She was threatening to sue me for damages if I didn't cease and desist all hostile actions immediately. I laughed so hard I nearly fell off the porch swing. But underneath the laughter, I felt the stakes rise. Karen wasn't playing neighborhood petty games anymore. She was bringing lawyers into it, dragging me into a fight where even a frivolous case could bleed me dry in court fees. That night, Sam texted me, "Board emergency meeting tomorrow. She's rallying the troops. Be ready." And ready I was. Because while Karen thought she'd corner me with lawsuits, she didn't know the card I had left to play. The sheriff wasn't just a friend. He was a witness. And not just a casual one. He'd seen her vandalize my Harley with his own eyes. He'd documented it. He'd filed it. The HOA's boardroom wasn't much of a boardroom at all. Just a converted community center with folding chairs, fluorescent lights that buzzed like hornets, and a big corkboard plastered with rules no one read. But that night it might as well have been a courtroom. The chairs were packed, neighbors squeezed shoulder to shoulder, muttering under their breath. The tension smelled like burnt coffee and hairspray. And at the front of it all sat Karen, perched behind a folding table draped in a white cloth, her gavel gleaming like she thought she was running Congress. I walked in deliberately late, Harley keys jingling in my hand, wearing boots still dusty from the ranch. Every head turned. Karen stiffened, but quickly masked it with a wide smile that looked painted on. "Ah, there he is," she said, voice amplified through the cheap microphone. "The man of the hour." The way she said it, I might as well have been a criminal defendant walking to the gallows. I scanned the crowd and saw familiar faces. Sam and Linda sitting near the middle, nodding encouragement, a few others who'd been at the garage meetings. But I also saw the nervous ones, people who feared their mortgage payments more than they hated Karen, the ones who'd rather tolerate tyranny than rock the boat. Those were the ones she still controlled. Karen banged the gavel. "This emergency session of the Homeowners Association is called to order. Tonight, we address the ongoing disturbances caused by Mr. Lakeview Drive." She gestured at me, refusing to use my name, whose repeated violations threaten the peace and property values of this community. The murmurs swelled. Some rolled their eyes. Others leaned forward, curious. I stayed leaning against the back wall, arms crossed, saying nothing. "Let her dig." She launched into a speech, her voice climbing higher with each word. She accused me of intimidation, vandalism, and unlawful use of community access points. She held up her lawyer's letter like it was the Ten Commandments. She even gestured dramatically toward the window, as if my Harley parked outside was a smoking gun. The more she talked, the more absurd it got. And that's when I made my move. I pushed off the wall, walked slow to the front, and placed a folder on the table. "Sheriff's Incident Report," I said loud enough for the whole room. "Dated 2 weeks ago. Official documentation that your president here vandalized my property, shoved my Harley into the lake. Witnessed, signed, and filed. The room went dead quiet. Even the buzzing fluorescent lights seemed to pause. Karen's face drained of color. "That is completely irrelevant," she stammered. "We are here to discuss his violations." I leaned close, my voice low but carrying. "You accuse me of harassment, but you're the one caught red-handed by the sheriff. You accuse me of damaging property values, but you're dragging the entire HOA into legal risk with bogus claims. And now you've put every homeowner here in danger of lawsuits. That's not leadership, Karen. That's liability." Gasps rippled across the crowd. One man in the front stood up. "Is this true? Did you actually push his bike into the lake?" Karen pounded the gavel. "Sit down. You're out of order." But the damage was done. People started whispering furiously. Some looked at her with open disbelief. Others with the anger of folks finally realizing they'd been conned. Then Linda, bless her, raised her hand and spoke in a steady voice. "I've lived here for 10 years, and I've never seen this community so divided. Karen, you've overstepped. It's time we talk about leadership that serves us, not controls us." The murmurs turned to nods. Someone else chimed in, motioned to call for a vote of confidence. Karen's face contorted. "You can't. This isn't on the agenda." But it was too late. Once neighbors taste rebellion, there's no stuffing it back in a box. The board's vice president, a meek man named Harold who usually parroted Karen's every word, cleared his throat. "Actually, per bylaws, any member can call a vote if leadership is questioned." His voice shook, but the words hit like a hammer. Karen whipped toward him, hissing, "Don't you dare." But Harold looked at the crowd, then at me, then back at her, and something cracked. "I second the motion." The room erupted. People clapped, shouted, demanded ballots. For the first time, Karen's control slipped, and she knew it. She tried to regain footing, waving her arms. "This is chaos. You're letting an outsider dictate our community." That's when I pulled out the ace I'd been saving. I held up my deed, certified copy with the county seal. "Outsider? Karen, I don't live in your HOA. I'm not subject to your rules. And yet you've dragged me into this circus. If you want to talk outsiders, maybe start with the woman who thought she could steal land that isn't hers." It was a knockout punch. The crowd roared, and even the meekest neighbors looked emboldened. The board scrambled, whispering, flipping through papers. Finally, Harold announced, "We will proceed with the vote of confidence." Karen's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping on a dock. She tried one last time, slamming her palm on the table. "If you remove me, this community will fall apart. You'll regret it." But nobody was listening anymore. They were lining up to cast their votes. The tally didn't take long. Out of 30 ballots, 22 voted no confidence. 5 abstained. 3 supported her. Karen's reign had crumbled in under an hour. When Harold announced the result, her face twisted, tears welling, fury and humiliation mixing like oil and water. She stood, trembling, and spat in my direction. "You think you've won, but you've destroyed this community. Don't come crawling back when your little victory turns to ashes." Then she stormed out, heels cracking like gunfire against the linoleum. For a long moment, the room stayed silent. Then Sam raised his beer can, he'd smuggled it in his jacket, and said, "To new beginnings." Laughter rippled, cheers followed, and just like that, the crowd transformed from scared neighbors into something almost free. But here's the twist. See, I thought dethroning Karen would be the end. That once she lost her gavel, she'd retreat to lick her wounds. But I underestimated her again. 2 nights later, I woke to the roar of an engine and the acrid smell of smoke. Sprinting outside, I saw flames licking at the edge of my shed, the one where I keep spare parts for the Harley. My stomach dropped. Someone had torched it. I grabbed the hose, doused the flames before they spread, and by the time the sheriff pulled up, the fire was mostly out. But the damage was clear. Charred walls, melted tools, ash scattered across the gravel. The sheriff knelt, sniffed the air, then found a half-burned gasoline can tossed in the weeds. He looked up at me, grim. This wasn't an accident. I didn't have to say the name out loud. We both knew who was behind it. Karen had been humiliated, stripped of power, publicly dethroned. And in her mind, that meant only one thing: revenge. The war hadn't ended in the boardroom. It had just gone underground. And now it wasn't about bylaws or fines or even fences. Now it was about survival. The smell of burnt wood clung to me for days. Every time I walked past the shed, even after I scrubbed and repaired, the charred edges whispered a reminder. Karen wasn't finished. Losing the HOA presidency had stripped her of her crown, but it hadn't stripped her of her spite. She had been humiliated in public, dethroned by her own neighbors. And in her mind, that meant one thing: she had to take me down or be seen as weak forever. The sheriff was blunt the morning after the fire. He stood in my driveway, arms crossed, the half-melted gas sitting between us like exhibit. Look, I can't charge her without evidence. No fingerprints, no witnesses, no camera footage. It's just suspicion. But I'll tell you this: if I were you, I'd get ready. She's desperate now. People cornered like this, they do dumb, dangerous things. I nodded, but inside, I was already making plans. Karen thought she had pushed me as far as I could go. Fines, fences, lawsuits, fire. But she'd miscalculated one thing. I was patient. I didn't lash out. I set traps. 2 days later, I installed motion trigger cameras. Not cheap ones, either infrared, wide angle, high resolution. I wired them to backup storage in case someone tried to tamper with them. Sam helped me set them high under the eaves of my porch and around the shed. If Karen came back, she'd star in her own downfall. I didn't have to wait long. 3 nights later, at 2:14 a.m., the cameras lit up my phone. I tapped the feed, and there she was, Karen herself, creeping down my driveway in a hoodie, clutching something in her hand. A hammer. She headed straight for my mailbox. I watched, live, as she swung once, twice, 3 times, splintering the post. She yanked open the box, dumped its contents into a garbage bag, and then, with one last furious kick, stormed off into the dark. The video was perfect. Clear face shot, clear weapon, clear intent. At 7 a.m., I sent the clip to the sheriff. By 9 a.m., he was at her doorstep. By 9:15, Karen was in handcuffs. But here's where the story twisted bigger than I could have imagined. See, the arrest alone would have been satisfying. Watching her stuffed into the back of a cruiser, her neighbors peeking through curtains as the queen bee was carted off, was pure vindication. But the real shock came when the sheriff called me later that afternoon. His voice was half amusement, half disbelief. "You're not going to believe this," he said. "We pulled her in on vandalism, but when we searched her house under warrant, we found boxes, dozens of them, all HOA records going back years. And guess what? She's been running a little side hustle." Turns out, Karen hadn't just been a tyrant with too much time on her hands. She'd been embezzling. Every fine she issued that wasn't official, every processing fee she charged, every bogus citation she mailed, she'd been pocketing. Thousands of dollars, siphoned off neighbors too scared or too tired to fight her. The whole HOA had been her personal ATM. The sheriff chuckled. "You didn't just knock her off her throne. You exposed the whole rotten empire." Word spread fast. Faster than the Harley in the lake story. Faster than the fence fiasco. By evening, the entire neighborhood knew Karen wasn't just entitled. She was a crook. The same people who once nodded nervously at her threats were now, on my porch, shaking my hand, thanking me for standing up to her. Even Harold, the timid vice president, showed up with tears in his eyes. "I should have seen it sooner," he admitted. "I let her bully me into silence. But you stood firm. For the first time since moving here, I didn't feel like an outsider." But Karen, even in disgrace, wasn't done yet. A week later, I got a letter. Handwritten, shaky penmanship, but unmistakably hers. From a county jail. "You think you've beaten me," it read. "But you've poisoned this neighborhood. You've made them distrust each other, doubt the system. Even if I never set foot back in that subdivision, you'll always be the man who divided them. You'll always be the outsider. You'll never belong." I read it twice, then laughed. Not because she was wrong in her own mind, because it showed she still didn't get it. I hadn't divided the neighborhood. She had. All I did was hold up a mirror. I didn't write back. I didn't need to. The letter was her last gasp, her final attempt to claw back control through words since she'd lost every weapon that mattered. In the weeks that followed, the neighborhood changed. The HOA board, free from Karen's grip, actually started functioning like neighbors instead of tyrants. Rules were relaxed, fines reduced, meetings turned into potlucks instead of tribunals. Sam and Linda became some of my closest friends. We started riding into town together on weekends. People who once avoided eye contact waved as I passed. And the Harley? She wore her scars proudly. A little lake rust, a char mark on one saddlebag from the fire, a dent from Karen's hammer. I didn't fix those. I left them. They were battle medals, proof of what happens when patience meets persistence, when arrogance meets accountability. The sheriff stopped by one evening, off duty, holding 2 cold beers. We sat on the porch, watching the sun drop into the lake. He nodded at the Harley. You ever think about selling it, after all that? I shook my head. Not a chance. That bike outlasted Karen. That makes it priceless. He grinned. Can't argue with that. For a while we just sat in silence, cicadas buzzing, the lake glittering. Then he said, you know, you could have pressed charges that first day. Could have ended this sooner. Yeah, I said, sipping my beer. But then the neighborhood never would have seen who she really was. Sometimes the long game's the only game worth playing. He raised his bottle. To the long game, then. We clinked glass. And that was it. That's how the war ended. Not with fists, not with shouting, but with truth dragging the queen bee out into the daylight until she melted like wax. Of course, I know how stories spread. 10 years from now, some neighbor will tell it like folklore. The tale of how the outsider with the Harley took down the HOA tyrant. The details will blur. Maybe they'll say, she pushed my bike into the lake during a thunderstorm, or that the sheriff arrested her right there at the water's edge. Doesn't matter. What matters is this. I didn't just win against Karen. I won my place here. And every time I fire up the Harley and let the engine roar across the lake, I remember the look on her face when the sheriff snapped those handcuffs shut. That's the sound of freedom.